Welcome to Connect.Tech today. My name is Mike Clement. I'm VP of Engineering at Immersion. You can contact me in a couple different places, but we'll talk about that more later. Let's get right into it. So, you're here to talk about Refactor to make the change easy, then make the easy change. So first off, we want to define what refactoring is. This is a term that gets used a lot in our industry and gets thrown around a lot, and is often referred to colloquially as like just cleaning up our code. But we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about what that might look like. So oftentimes we get to when we're done with a project and we're like, hey, the outside looks great, everything is working, we deliver the software, people are happy with it. But sometimes as a result of all of that construction, all that work, sometimes we leave a mess on the inside. Right? We have poor structure in our code. We have things that we're not quite happy with. And so we sometimes talk about refactoring as doing these invisible things to clean up after ourselves, after we're done. And this is consistent somewhat with Martin Fowler's definition of refactoring that he gives as part of that he posts on his blog, but is also part of how he describes it in his book Refactoring. Martin, being the one that coined the term, gets to, I assume, define the term. And it's not just cleaning up, it's making intentional internal structure or changes to the internal structure of our software without changing its observable behavior. Now, the thing is that at the point where we're ready to maybe clean up after we've made a mess, we've maybe slogged through a lot of things in order to get the changes that we wanted in place. And what this does is this, at this point, if we're like, okay, now we're going to go ahead and clean up, we're going to like change the internal structure of the software. The challenge there is that we're trying to play psychic a little bit, in that we are anticipating future changes. I mean, the only reason to clean up now is so that we can, be able to unlock future potential, to be able to move in a more elegant, more agile, graceful way in the future with regards to how we modify our code. Now, again, the problem is that we are casting our eyes into the future. We are attempting to look into a crystal ball, maybe a magic 8-ball, whatever it is that we're trying to do. We're trying to read the future a little bit. Cleaning up today in order for some future point. Now, sometimes this can be effective, but in my opinion, in my experience, and also in Kent Beck's experience, I found this tweet a few years ago, and Kent says, for each desired change, make the change easy, warning us that this may be hard, and then make the easy change. So the idea here is that we want to, when we're about to make a change, as opposed to afterwards. So before we make the change that we need to make in the code, we want to change the internal structure of the code without changing the behavior, and then go ahead and change the behavior in the way that we anticipate. So I had found this in this pithy way, but I also recognized that Martin actually said this in his book, and somehow I had missed it. And this book is nearly 20 years old. The second edition just came out, so this is really good advice, right? So this idea of first refactor to make the program easier to add the feature. Do that first, and then add the feature. By doing this, we can improve our experience with the code. It'll make it easier. It'll make it potentially also more error-free as we go ahead and add features to the code. So what this does is it kind of flips on its head what we often call the test-driven development cycle, or the TDD cycle, where we say we are going to start with red. We're going to write a failing test. We're going to make it green. We're going to make it pass. And then we're going to go ahead and refactor, meaning that, again, like I've said before, we're going to somehow get it working in a kind of sloppy, dirty way, and then go ahead and refactor afterwards to clean it up. So using this mindset, what we're going to do is we're going to flip it up and we're going to say, before we make it red, before we write that failing test, we are going to go ahead and refactor, and then we're going to write the failing test, and then we are going to, again, make that easy change after we have made the change easy. So we're going to go ahead and now move into a demo. So this is an adaptation of code that Martin actually had in his first book, first edition of Refactoring. The second edition has a slightly different, but actually quite similar in terms of structure, code example that he uses. So the idea here is that, again, part of why he changed it is that the idea of a video rental store is a little bit out of date, at least in terms of renting movies from a physical location. But the idea here is that we're going to create a statement based off of some data about some movie rentals. This is going to calculate amounts of how much each movie we need to pay for based off of the type of movie and also the number of days that we do it, that we're going to rent it. Additionally, there's this idea of frequent renter points, but we're going to see if maybe we can ignore that. But we may have time to be able to work with that as well. But again, the idea is that we're not just going to go ahead and refactor this to make us feel better. We're not going to make structural changes because we feel like it's the right thing to do, or that it's for some altruistic reason. We're going to do it because right now we're jumping into this code and we have been asked to add an additional type of movie, right? So as you can see here, there's this switch statement that tells us, say, if it's regular, then do this. If it's new, then do this. If it's children's, then do this. And we're kind of doing these different things based off of this movie code. And so what we want to do is we want to add a new movie code. In this case, this movie code, we're going to call it horror. Oftentimes when I've done this live, that is the genre that people prefer to add. So we're going to go ahead and add horror. And we're going to make it so that the amount that is charged is going to be twice the number of days. So if it's 2 days, then it'll be $4, for example. Now, in this particular toy example, right, we could just go ahead and add another case to the switch statement, and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But you can imagine in a larger system that maybe perhaps this code is used in multiple different places, the code meaning the movie code. And there might be multiple switch statements in multiple places throughout the code. And this can cause us angst, can cause us problems in terms of having to find all of the places that we're going to have to add things. And so what we're going to do to prepare, again, refactoring to make this change easier, instead of using switch statements, we're going to see if we can leverage some of our ability to create a polymorphic structure here and see how that goes. So I have written some tests in advance. These tests are using the approval test framework and basically are allowing us to ensure that all of these things are happening. If I run the tests with coverage, I can see over here that there are 100% of our lines are covered. If you look over here, you can see that there's these green bars along the side, and those help us visualize that those parts of the code are getting covered. And we're going to use that knowledge that right now we're completely covered as we stepwise go through this refactoring. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to recognize that here there's this comment that's saying determine amount for each movie. Now, I don't always trust comments, but in this particular case, this comment is actually kind of describing what this next section is. And so I'm going to grab that plus this little bit above, I'm going to use my tools here to do some refactoring, and I'm going to extract this part as a method. And what this is going to allow me to do is say, hey, you know what? We said this is determining the amount. We're just going to call it determine amount. And that encodes that information, that knowledge that we have about the code, into the actual code. Now, if we come down here, we can now delete this comment. Now, if we're noticing here, now determine amount, now it takes in a movie and it takes in an R. We're going to do an additional refactoring here, because if we go through and look at R, we can see highlighted all of the R's are actually only way we're using R is r.days. And so in that particular case, one of the principles here at play is that we don't want to pass more into a method or a function than is necessary for that function. Basically, we don't want to expose more information about ourselves when we pass stuff in. That unnecessarily couples us together. So in this particular case, what we're going to do is quickly take this r.days, and I'm going to introduce parameter. I'm going to replace all 5 occurrences, and I'm going to call it days. And so now what my tooling here, I'm using WebStorm, which is a JetBrains product. It has added an additional parameter called days. It has defaulted to r.days, and it continued to pass in r, right? Because we didn't necessarily want to change that yet. But now we can see that we're not using r. So I'm going to change the signature. I am going to use my tooling here to remove r. And now we just have days. And so again, the tooling has been nice in that it has changed the call site as well. And that's very useful. Okay, but again, it's has a problem here in that it's trying to do r.days here, and because we're no longer using that, we really don't want that to be a default here. We actually want to pass that in here. Again, we don't want to expose the fact that these rentals, these objects, whatever R is, we just need the days. We don't really care what else is coming with that because our particular method doesn't need it. So I'm going to run my tests again just to give us a warm feeling here, and we're still 100%, and our test still passes. Now, okay, so excellent. So the thing is, again, we have these different types, and we have a movie class here. Now, the thing is that this movie class doesn't actually have any. It has data, it has the code and the title, but it does not have any functionality in it. Now, I know sometimes in JavaScript we're not always object-oriented in our thinking, but in this particular case, it seems like it'd be useful for determine amount, given that the movie's being passed in here and our code is being used to switch on here, that perhaps the movie ought to own determine amount. We could debate that, but for the purposes of our exercise today, we are just going to go ahead and in other languages, the tooling would allow me to move this between classes, but the JavaScript tooling does not have a function that lets me do that. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste it, and then change this call to do movie. And because it's a small, quick change, and I ran my test before, I'm going to run my test after, and my test pass, so that gives me confidence. Now, if you're like, I've only seen these tests pass, Mike, I don't have any confidence in these tests. So what I'm going to do just really quick, I'm going to change the initialization of total amount to 2. And what that's going to allow us to do is run the test, and we're going to see it fail. You see this tortoise merge window here, and what I'm using, again, I said I'm using approval tests, and you can see here that right here, the received, meaning the calculated value, is 27, and the amount owed in the accepted file or the approved or golden master file is 25. So you can see that that 2 got added here. It blew up when we changed the code, and changing the code and seeing what tests blow up is actually a pretty good way to ensure that your tests are actually doing what you expect them to do. So again, we can have a little bit of confidence that our tests are doing what we expect. So the next step we're going to take here is we're going to create some subclasses, right? So movie, so instead of having one movie and switching on the code, what we're going to do is slowly extract some of this functionality into subclasses. So in this particular case, we're going to create a class, call it regular movie, and it's going to extend movie, and it's going to have a constructor, and in this constructor, given that the code is going to be in here, we're just going to take a title, and then we're going to pass the title down to the movie, and then we're going to hard code that this is regular. Okay, so if I were to run the test now, which I'll do really quick, our coverage would indicate this isn't being used, right? This is red. This regular movie, the tooling is also grayed this out, saying this isn't being used, which is not ideal. So what we're going to do is take that and come up here, and we have this little database of movies. Again, in a real situation, you're probably going to do something like have a real database, and potentially in some sort of ORM or micro ORM or in some sort of database translation layer, you're going to take what's in the database and turn it into objects that you're going to interact with. And we're just sort of short-circuiting that for today. So you'd have to configure whatever tool you're using or change whatever code you're using in order to say, instead of a movie, when you see regular in the database, that you're going to create a regular movie. And so we no longer need to pass in these guys. And if we did everything right, we should be able to run this, and it should now still work. And we should be back to 100% lines covered, which is great. Okay, but that in and of itself is kind of interesting, but not super useful. So what we really want to do is take this determine amount code, and we're going to copy and paste it into our regular movie class. And by doing that, determine amount now is going to when we need to determine the amount for the regular movie, it's going to use this function instead of the function in the super class. So I'm going to go ahead and run our tests. Our tests should still pass. They're still green. But if we look here, if we go up here to movie, determine amount, this regular case is no longer being used, which is what we expect. We expect that now it is using the other code. So I'm going to pull that case out, and then we're going to come down here to determine amount, and we're going to realize that these other cases are not being used as well, which is understandable given that the only time it should be in here is when it's a regular case. So I'm going to remove those. I'm going to go ahead and run our tests. And after that's in place, which it's good, then we can actually get rid of this switch statement. And get rid of these pieces around there. Again, I'm going to run our tests again. I'm going to get rid of this redundant initializer. I'm going to join that up, and we could potentially do some additional simplification, but this is pretty good, right? This is all of the logic that we need for a regular, determining the amount for a regular movie. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing for new and for children's. So we're going to do new movie, extends movie, and I'm going to create a constructor and give it a title. It's going to pass the title and the code new. We are going to come up here to our database, and change that. Run the tests. Not bueno. Okay, so something happened here where, let's see what happened. New movie. Oh, that's because we changed Cars 2 to be a new movie when it's a children's movie as opposed to that one. So again, our test saved us, which is awesome. Let's go ahead and do that, and that passes. Excellent. Again, our test giving us confidence that the changes we're making are appropriate. Again, we're going to copy that determined amount. If you notice that it's giving us a warning at a certain point saying that we duplicated our code, but didn't give it to us this time, which is interesting. But as we can see here in determined amount for new movie, the children's case is never getting hit, so we can remove that. And also up here in our movie, new is not getting used because it's now moved down to our new movie class. And we can see that that's working out well. And then we can come back here to new movie, get rid of the switch, get rid of the break. We can remove the redundant initializer. We can join that in, and then we can also go ahead and inline that. And now all we need to know is that for a new movie, it's days times 3. Excellent. Let's run our test really quick just to make sure that we're all on board here. Okay, and now we're going to do one more. So we have to get children's out of there. Children's movie, extends movie, and we have a constructor, and title, and children's. Okay, excellent. Just like with the last one, we're going to go up here. We have one left, so hopefully that is the right one. And we'll go ahead and run our tests. Okay. Again, we see by coverage, it's actually using this children's movie. We can go ahead and take this determined amount and can actually just move this down here. Let's run our tests. And again, in a more strongly typed language, we would need to leave static or something in place up in our movie class, but we don't necessarily need that in JavaScript. It's JavaScript, don't care. Which is both an advantage and a disadvantage depending upon how you're looking at it. So we'll go ahead and remove that last switch. And our test pass. We are at 100% coverage, which means that we are good to go. Okay, we just have a few minutes left. If I had more time, what I would do is I would move these frequent renter points, move that calculation, because what we do is we have right here, if it's new, then do this, which is really a form of a hidden switch statement. Oftentimes, switch statements can hide in if and if else and if else trees. And so, well, sometimes those structures can be useful. In general, they can be hard to, oftentimes they're duplicated in different parts of the code and can be difficult to reason about. So if we had more time, I would move the frequent renter points into those subclasses so that calculation was happening there, probably with a default implementation in the movie class that just did a single point add. But for now, maybe we'll have time to get back to it, but I don't think so. So what we're going to do is now that we've done refactor, we're going to go ahead and do red. And so this, again, is our little test. I'm just going to copy it, and we'll just do should horror. Okay, so given that, we're going to say it's movie ID 5, and we're going to do it for 3 days, which should give us 6, because we said it was going to be times 3, or times 2. We're not going to do anything funky with it. We're going to run the tests, and this should blow up all over the place, right? Cannot read property determine amount of undefined, because we don't have a movie in our database that is horror. So what we're going to do is do F5 new. We're just going to do movie. I'm just going to do Scream. I'm not really a horror movie aficionado, so forgive me. We're going to go ahead and run the test again. This is going to give us some additional information now. It still says determine amount is not a function because movie doesn't have one. We're just going to get ahead and say we want a horror movie, and we are going to go ahead and create horror movie extends movie. We're going to again create that same constructor. And we're going to have the horror, and then we're going to just determine amount. And determine amount takes in movie and days. And we're just going to return 0 for now, so that our test gives us the opportunity to approve a result. Now, right, our tortoise merge pops up. It says Scream is 0, amount of O is 0. I'm going to use this whole thing here. And pull over those results. But 0 isn't really what we want. We said we wanted 6. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to save that. And if we run our test again, we're going to see that it still fails, but it's going to say that it got 0 and we expected 6, which is what we want. So now we can just easily go in here and do days times 2, which again is our change that we're made easy, and now it passes. And we're 100% coverage. This new thing is covered. And now we can easily add additional functionality, additional movies without a whole lot of, especially around this determining amount. If again, we wanted to add frequent render points to this, that would be really simple to do. And one thing that I just noticed that I neglected to do near the beginning is remove movie. Right, movie is no longer necessary to be passed in at the point where we did this. So I'm going to go ahead and change the signature. Okay. Oh, the method to be refactored. So we're going to go ahead and change this. Let's see if we can do it. We're going to remove that. And it did not change it in all the places. So I'm going to have to manually do it. If I were to do this at the point where I first moved it to the movie class, that would have been the ideal place to do it, and the place with the least impact to the code. But this should work as well. Okay. Again, doing it earlier would have given me better confidence, but because we took out, we could do it at the point where we no longer had the code, right? So we no longer had the code we're passing in. We're no longer doing the switch statement, so we can now remove movie. We could have changed it to this.movie at that earlier point and no longer passed it in. Anyway, This is the beauty of a live demo, right? Even though this is, I guess, pre-recorded. So I'm going to move back to the slides to finish up. So just to finish up, right, we just did our demo. Again, traditionally, when we do TDD, we do red, green, refactor. In this particular case, we're going to flip it on its head. We're going to refactor first before we go red. Again, refactoring to make the change easy and then make the easy change. I hope this was useful for you. I hope that you can use this. If you want to contact me, here's some information about me. I also run Meetup here in Atlanta called the Software Crafters Atlanta. If you'd like to join us, it's an interactive meetup and a lot of fun. But other than that, thanks for joining me today at Connect.Tech. I hope this was useful to you, and have a great rest of your conference experience.